In patch 12.8, Riot gave Jhin a weird buff, giving him bonus damage on his W and his E, specifically against monsters, instead of the more common buffs that a champion gets. These changes were clearly made just to help Jhin kill camps, also gaining more CC duration on his root, and a lower cooldown on his traps. Jhin just gained 4 new tools to use in the jungle. With these new low cooldown traps, a new jungle clear was invented, so now Jhin could clear as one of the fastest junglers in the game, being done by 3 minutes and 5 seconds. And with the bonus CC on his W, as well as the other tools in his kit, Jhin Jungle actually began to look playable. So a ton of high elo players began to test him, and so I talked to one master tier jungler who's been spamming Jhin more than anyone else to see all the special tricks he uses to make this pick work. But first, this video is sponsored by Alienware and their newest PC, the Aurora R13. I've had this PC for 5 months now and I've been using it every day. I work on it, I play games on it, I stream on it, and it's so fast, meaning it's so fun to use. I really recommend it. It's not going to make you challenger overnight, but with top of the line AMD and Nvidia graphics, all the way up to the RTX 3090, gone will be the days of blaming your missed skill shots on your computer. So of course this PC is great for League on the higher settings, but whenever you want some time away from League, you could try out the newest AAA games on the higher settings possible. The R13 effortlessly plays games like Cyberpunk, Apex, and anything else I throw at it, all in ultra quality. Having a good PC even makes me not want to play League every day because of having the option of playing all of these other games, so that's a great bonus. This PC has been essential for making all of my videos this year, speeding up my editing process, reducing render times a ton, which allows me to spend more time talking to players, doing interviews, learning, and making sure the information is as high quality as possible. Having a powerful computer like this has opened doors to new opportunities that I otherwise could never have done. I learned to edit because I had a powerful PC, which let me start up this channel, and now have a job because of it. So if you want to open up your future and your gaming life, you too can get the R13 at the link in the description. Please check it out, and thanks so much to Alienware for sponsoring. Now back to Jhin Jungle, the only pick that can gank enemies while sitting on blue buff. Our player today is named Just2Aces, a player with a history of playing off-meta junglers. He told me that he was one of the first to try Morgana jungle, even before it got buffed into a meta pick. As soon as the Jhin Jungle buffs came out, Aces began to test it, jumping into practice tool to see how it works. Jhin Jungle has probably the most unique jungle clear of any champion, but in exchange for this complex path, it is very fast. A normal AD carry in the jungle has a ton of issues with tanking monsters, having to kite each camp, and by the end of it, they usually don't have enough health to gank. But with this clear, Jhin has none of these issues. Right at the start of the game, Aces runs out of base, taking his E, the trap. He does this so that it begins to charge up immediately as the game starts. This ability can hold 2 charges, so Aces wants to get the second charge as fast as possible so that he can run to raptors and begin to stack them on top of each other. He puts 2 traps down in this bush next to raptors, not on top of the camp, making sure they won't activate when the camp spawns. He then wards to prevent an invade and bases to get a sweeper. Returning to raptors again from base, Jhin places 2 more traps down in the same spot. By stacking all of the traps here, he can still go and get a big leash on red buff, using 4th shot and the smite at the last moment, so he can then reload between camps, not wasting any time. He then runs over to the raptors, kiting them into the bush for their AoE trap damage, comboing all of this damage with his W, which he shoots through all of the minions for even more AoE. The small raptors all instantly die, so Jhin can quickly kill the large one with auto attacks and move on. He then blast cones over this wall, not doing blue buff, instead throwing a trap down near wolves and starting his Gromp. Killing Gromp is very simple for Jhin. He has good auto attack damage, and he gets health at the end, which is useful for his clear, but most importantly he just gets more time so he can keep stacking these traps near wolves. Then doing his blue, kiting it and putting down more traps whenever they're available, finishing off the blue buff with his W that shoots through the blue right onto the wolves, which aggros them and pulls them right into his traps. Again, it's a really great setup, quickly bursting through the camp to finish his clear at just after 3 minutes. This path is the best one for keeping up with the meta junglers, and even lets you beat them to the crab, which Jhin can smite and kill in a couple of seconds, before the enemy shows up. And the same path works on blue, stacking traps on wolves first instead, while you do the blue and the Gromp, and then again stacking them on raptors in the same way, so Jhin can adapt to whichever lane he wants to gank. And ganking is the most interesting part of Jhin Jungle. We now know that his jungle clear is pretty great, so we can move on to something that Jhin is always good at, and that is fighting at long range. When you pick Jhin in lane, he's very good for setting up ganks. As long as an enemy has been hit, hit, he can throw a long range W, and if it lands, it's usually good enough CC to get a kill on that enemy. But in jungle, this ability is much better, because it's a lot harder to anticipate. If you're laning against a Jhin, you always know when you're marked, and you're likely to get engaged on. But when Jhin is in the jungle, his roots will be shooting out from Fog of War with no warning. This pick really changes the game, because anytime an enemy has been hit with damage, they're vulnerable to getting ganked. It's a bit like playing versus an Evelynn. Enemies should always assume that Jhin is nearby, as he can appear with an instant long-range CC at any point and catch you out. But of course this is solo queue, so I wouldn't expect anyone to actually play around this risk. The way this player ganks always starts with a W from Fog of War at a weird angle. Enemies are used to dodging the straight line through the lane W, but dodging one from the side is a different skill, making it a bit easier for Jhin to land. This surprise CC is really good at catching enemies out, giving your laner time to move in for the kill, and combo it with their own CC. Bot lane is always Ace's focus, and the reason for that is simple. Jhin is a squishy, low mobility pick, so whenever he's in a fight early on, he's limited in what he can do. So by having two players in bot lane ready to help him, he can be much safer whenever there's a fight. Also, another bonus of ganking bot lane is that he's ganking similar, low mobility and squishy picks, so his job is a lot less risky. And to top all of that off, there's a lot of CC and trading in bot lane, so landing his W is much easier there. It's clearly the best place for him to be. Jhin can also solo dragon early on. It's pretty high risk since you have no escape, but this player still does it, and often wins games because of how quickly he's got his team a dragon soul. Since he's already playing bot side, he ganks bot lane and gets dragon, and he does this instead of going top lane to farm. Jhin definitely isn't the fastest farmer early on, but instead he has good CC for early fights, so he focuses on that strength instead of trying to keep up with the meta junglers. But you cannot just win games by only ganking bot lane, so luckily Jhin has another tool to help his other lanes. This is his traps, turning Jhin into a scout. He drops them around the map in choke points, using them as mini wards. He can place them down in paths that the enemy jungler is likely to use when he's ganking. This gives his laner an early warning, effectively stopping the gank, even when Jhin is nowhere near. At level 6, Jhin evolves, becoming possibly the safest ganker in the game. One thing that all junglers hate is the effort you have to put in sacrificing your farm to leave the jungle just to gank for your teammates. But now all of this changes with this blue buff Gank, using his ultimate from really far away inside Fog of War so he can't even be seen. When have you ever seen a gank that's this far away and has no possible way for the enemy to turn it around? Each time Jhin is doing a jungle camp, he can always pop ult to join a fight, collecting a kill and then returning back to farming. It's every jungler's dream. You can think of it like playing Nocturne, but he's got a gun. There are some absolutely stupid lineups that Jhin can use to gank, from his own side of the map, behind a wall, shooting long-range bullets from Fog of War, or even from inside the enemy jungle, again ganking from complete safety and getting kills under tower. Or here the enemy top laner is about to get dived, so he bases to try and escape. A Jhin W from long range in Fog of War stops this base, and then Jhin comes in providing the high damage to get the kill, easily getting out. He sets up the play and is the DPS that they need to finish it as well. Thanks to this range, Jhin can answer plays much easier than even some meta junglers. If he's 2,500 units away, which is the range of his W, he can still help his laner, and the ult range is 3,500, so that's even better. Even just Jhin pressing his ultimate and having the slows can be enough to get kills. Enemies know that they can't run in a straight line to escape from you, they have to juke or run into the fight to try and trade a kill, so it acts a bit like a CC tool. Jin's job at this point of the game is being the DPS that his team needs to get these kills and win fights. He has the CC as well as the damage, but he lacks mobility, so counter ganking is really Jhin Jungle's best option. If he can put himself in the right place, enemies will run into him, making his W much easier to hit, and if enemies then run away, he has his long range ult to chase them down. This long range sniper style is what he created his build around as well, going for what I would call an ability damage build, similar to being a caster, where all of your damage, especially early on, comes from your abilities instead of auto attacks. He bases early for Serrated Dirk into his first item Eclipse, giving him a big early damage power spike, which also buffs up his ultimate damage, turning it into an actual threat. Thanks to the passive of this item, if you can hit 2 abilities in quick succession, enemies will also take 6% max health damage, on top of your other damage. Jhin ult is notoriously quite useless early on when you build crit, because only the 4th bullet really does any real damage, but with Eclipse, the early power is actually quite good, because of this passive and the lethality damage. Since his focus with this pick is safety, Eclipse lets Jhin fight himself out of situations where he otherwise would have died. Gale Force is another good option if you want to focus on scaling, but even Gale Force often isn't quite enough to completely get you out safely, since you don't have any mobility to combo with it. Even if enemies just have one dash, they can still follow your Gale Force and stay on top of you, but the extra health you get from the shield on Eclipse is much harder for enemies to counter. In mid-game, enemies that push up too far can easily be tagged at a maximum range and comboed with his ult for a chase down. It's very hard to push towers against Jhin Jungle, because he doesn't put himself in any danger at any point. Enemies are the ones who have to take the risk of facing him, and if they die, they give him gold, which he can use very effectively thanks to his really good scaling. In teamfights, Jhin continues his long-range sniper style, staying in the backline using his ability damage to collect kills. Because of this, of course he buys Collector, which synergizes well with your scaling, but also means that any low health enemy can be finished off with your ultimate. And in fact, this Jhin somehow managed to get a double kill with a single W usage at max range. This ability should only hit one person, so I don't know if this is a bug or a special item interaction. I think it must be Hextech Soul and Jhin also having Collector, so it's really cool that we got to see this unique situation in his replay. Other than that, you already know how he teamfights. He's a squishy, high damage AD carry. He wants to use his CC to kite enemies, and DPS his closest target until his team wins the fight. But more uniquely, Jungle Jhin can very easily last hit objectives with a combo of Fourth Shot and Smite at the same time. Usually when you have a Jhin on your team, it means that objectives are quite hard to take, since his attack speed is so low. But with this combo, you don't need to be as scared, being able to easily outsmite the enemy jungler, doing about 2000 damage instantly. As the game gets longer, Jhin is always a great scaling pick. I think it's widely agreed upon that he's one of the best in the game. If he can survive early game and get items, he can always kill multiple people in a fight and win the game, meaning he can definitely carry on this new role. The downside is that Jhin must continue to clear camps throughout the game. He's definitely not a low income jungler, because his champion isn't a low income champion. Jhin gets better and better based on how many items he can buy. One way to avoid this requirement is Jhin using his siege power to get more towers and end the game that way, using his long range to push enemies away, or even get kills under tower, creating an opportunity for his team to push and get extra gold. So instead of being forced to teamfight, you can win games this way. But we need to give the pick a rating. I've talked a lot about the good points of this pick, but now we need to look at the negatives. Of course, early game you have the high risk of getting invaded, but after that this pick is quite a safe jungler thanks to his long range. But I'd actually say that this long range is also his biggest weakness as well as his biggest strength, because although he can affect things from far away, he may not actually be able to affect them enough to actually carry games. If we compare this style to a meta jungler like Volibear, who by the way is very strong at the moment, it's very hard to play Volibear badly. Even if you're only using his tankiness, your point and click stun and auto attacks, you'll be more useful than most enemy junglers. When we compare this to Jhin in the jungle, he has to do a lot perfectly to have the same impact as Volibear, having a lot more skill shots and mechanics for him to use, which you can easily miss and fail a gank. Even our player has started to struggle, with his win rate going down after he stopped one-tricking it. Since the clear is so complex, at some point he seemed to forget how to do it, and the mechanical mistakes increased, since he wasn't playing it so constantly. And as a player, he mostly plays melee jungler, so it's unsurprising that he could struggle. He got to high elo by being a pretty good jungler, not by being a good Jhin player. If you can put both of these together, then this pick would be a lot more consistent, but the skill requirement is super high. One thing that really helps is banning picks like Rengar or Lee Sin, as mobility is very strong against you. The good matchups are enemies that power farm as well as ganking junglers, as Jhin can easily counter gank them, but he does lose to aggressive invade junglers, and picks that can dive you, things like Xin Zhao or Evelynn, but luckily none of these champions are actually meta at the moment, with ganking and farming junglers actually being the meta right now, so maybe it isn't a bad time to play Jhin. For his full build he starts Eclipse, for this great early power spike and lifesteal for camps. Gale Force is another option, but it's much more focused on scaling, so it's a risky choice for jungle. After this his build is very normal, Swifty boots, Collectors or Lord Dominics, against tanks, into Infinity Edge, finishing with Rapid Fire Cannon. Make sure you always start with your E, but then max your Q first, as you don't need any more traps. Q is more effective at clearing the jungle. For his runes he likes this Dark Harvest page, with Treasure Hunter to help him get higher income, and boots for free, just to save him some money. Ace's Twitter is linked in the description if you want to keep up with his experiments, and thanks again to our sponsor Alienware. If you're looking to get your first gaming PC or even upgrade, I really recommend you check out Alienware, link in the description, so you can play Jungle Jhin with perfect performance, and maybe try out some other games. Thanks so much for watching.